Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Pastor Study. A lot is spoken today about grace. Unfortunately, a lot of the information out there about grace is false. A lot of it is misleading, giving us the idea that we can do whatever we want to do, and grace will cover that. Paul writes to his buddy Titus. If Timothy was Paul's right hand, certainly Titus was his left hand. He was a protege of Paul's, and later launched out into his own ministry, using Paul's ministry as a springboard for that. But in Titus chapter 2, verse 14, he says this: Jesus gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. You know, I wonder how many times people set out to do something that they know is not honoring God, with the mindset that, oh, well, I'll confess tomorrow. You know, kind of like the guy who goes to Vegas, and when he gets to Vegas, he checks into his hotel and he looks through the yellow pages, finds a church, and calls the pastor and says, I'm here visiting from another city, and I'd like to know what time your church services are on Sunday morning. And well, the pastor is taken a little bit aback. That's not the kind of call he normally gets from visitors to Vegas. And in fact, he says so. He tells the guy, he says, well, we have a service at 9:30. We have another service at 11. We would certainly love to have you come, but I have to tell you that yours is a little bit of a misnomer, a bit of an unusual phone call here in Vegas. The guy's pretty honest, and he says, well, I'm not really coming for the church. He says, I'm coming for the gambling and the parties and the wild women. But if I have as much fun as I think I'm going to have on Saturday night, I'm going to need a church on Sunday morning. I think that's a false concept of grace. That we can do whatever we choose to do and walk into God's presence later. The intent of grace is certainly not to promote disobedience. Rather, grace teaches us not to live against God and not to embrace the evil things of the world. Rather, grace teaches us to live now in a way that's wise and right. In fact, here's what the rest of that passage in Titus chapter 2 says, beginning with verse 11. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. Grace is linked inextricably to salvation. In fact, that's what Paul says in that verse 14 we read a few moments ago. Grace is designed to redeem us from wickedness, purify us so that we can be his, eager to do what's good. We continue on with Titus 2, now verse 12. Grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, now verse 14 that we read earlier, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all unwickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. Grace is not to be a get-out-of-jail-free card when I do things that I know that are displeasing to God. Grace is designed to draw me further into to a relationship with him, further into his presence. In Ephesians chapter 2, writing to the church in Ephesus, Paul says this, verses 8 and 9. For it is by grace that you have been saved, through faith. Grace and faith are inextricably tied together. And when we begin to walk on the wrong side of the tracks, as it were, as we begin to disobey God, faith is certainly not in action, which tells me that grace is probably sadly lacking as well. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, Paul writes, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature, but rather serve one another in love. Grace doesn't take us to places that God doesn't want us to go. Grace rather gives us the freedom to serve him in newness of life. Grace gives us the freedom to embrace him, to love him, to enter into his presence in a new and a better way, to worship in ways that we've never been able to worship before. Grace has released us from the selfishness of our flesh. Why should we return? In fact, isn't that what Paul said in Galatians? That we're not to use grace, not to use our freedom to indulge the sinful nature, such as the guy in Vegas? but rather grace is what enables us to approach the Lord knowing that whatever sin is in our past is covered by the blood. Not because of anything we've done. Then it wouldn't be grace. Then it would be earned. But rather out of his deep and abiding love for us. And his concern that we in fact do make it to heaven. That we do get to fellowship with him for the rest of eternity because that's his goal. Because as Paul said in Titus 2, he does that to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own. Ultimately, that's what God desires, a relationship with us. Now I ask you this question, do you desire a relationship with him just as much? If you do, grace is there to help you meet that goal. I look forward to seeing you again in the Pastor Study.